Hello, and welcome to another episode of Minnesota Liberty podcast sponsored by the Libertarian Party in Minnesota. I am one of your hosts, Rebecca Whiting, and this evening I have with me Joey.
Hey.
And TJ had some work thing that came up, and it just happened to work out. Joey's here. And if you've actually watched the podcast that we started out, Joey's one of the original people that was on this back in the day.
Great to be
So,
back.
yeah.
Thanks for having me.
You don't want to dedicate your Wednesday evenings every night to, talking to, I don't know. It's
maybe.
Yeah,
we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. So, anyways, this evening we were interested. What's been in the news today has been the RFK lists, trying to find a cause and a cure for autism, and all of those things that come around that are just problematic, because where do you draw the line between security for people and in this, security is if somebody has a medical problem, you have access to all this information, trying to centralize it and utilize it to create, I don't know, a database to figure out, and what he wants to do, a cause and a cure for autism. And where do you draw the line between people's privacy and their liberty, versus their security? So I feel like there's a lot of people, especially people that perhaps have never really given themselves an opportunity to do that deep dive into, the long-term ramifications of setting a precedent of the government accessing private records for being able to, get that information. And what that could look like. Maybe he's doing it for good reasons, whether you agree, this is a thing. I mean, RFK has always been very open about autism, right? He's never he's never pulled punches on what he thinks autism, origination, vaccines, those kinds of things, right? He's always been kind of controversial in that manner. What do you think?
Yeah, for me, it is the authority thing, but it's also the hypocrisy, because I know many of my traditional left sort of people that I know who have brought this to my attention have done so in the vein of, isn't it so bad, the centralization of data? And I'm like, yes, it was also bad when Obama did it, and it was also bad when Bush Jr. did it, but you weren't paying attention then, or you were, but you liked it.
Right.
But now that it's somebody who thinks that vaccines cause, I'm not going to finish that particular string of words for algorithmic reasons, now suddenly it's somebody you don't want centralizing your data. And it's like, I didn't want the people that you liked centralizing my data. Now that it's people that you don't like, I still don't want them to centralize your data.
Right. And, the way I see, with all laws, rules, regulations, everything the government does, the bureaucracy, because there's a lot of things that get pushed through government that never go through the legislative process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Through the bureaucracy and the ATF, the FBI, those 3-letter agencies that they just make policy. there's no legislative process to their actual policy.
Yeah, it was interesting seeing the recent the recent removal of Kash Patel as ATF director, in tandem with, or relatively close in time with, the courts upholding the frame and receiver rule. As ATF can absolutely set that as their policy if they want to. So I guess ATF just isn't going the way that I was hoping that it would, and I know plenty of people who are feeling the same way about that. Shout out to Brandon Herrera. Should have made him ATF director. Everything would have been so much better.
I think it also just highlights that these 3-letter agencies have a lot more power than perhaps even our Congress does. And that's absolutely backwards as the way that it was supposed to be intended. The power is supposed to be with the people and their representatives, not with the backroom deals through the bureaucratic process and just, writing some sort of policy and essentially creating law without going through the process. But that's what they're doing, and that's what they've been doing for a long time. So I'm curious as to how. I mean, I'm sure that RFK is not going to go through the legislative process either. Like, they're just going to be like, hey, we want these records. This is only controversial because RFK is no longer part of, the in crowd. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If he was just a Kennedy and he was part of the Kennedy clan and doing, acting essentially as a tool of the Kennedy clan, doing what they wanted him to do as a Kennedy, it would just be, just penciled in. So, however, and Kennedy's rise to where he is has been has been a little something to watch, like him break away from that left-leaning group. I mean, the Kennedys have a long history of being Democrats,
Mm-hmm.
right? And now I'm not sure what he considers himself to be, but Trump is obviously not a Democrat. But it's NPR, and actually I will drop the link into the comments on the show, but it's NPR that's well, the article I have is NPR, and I'm just read this out loud. So, the National Institute of Health will begin collecting Americans' private health records as part of Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s controversial plan to discover a cause and cure for autism. NIH Director I'm not even sure
Bhattacharya.
Is that how you say it?
Yes.
Told a panel of experts about the plan this week. So, there's a lot just in that first paragraph to unpack. And this is one of those subjects, I think, where you could very easily get off on multiple tangents, but miss the core, I think, of the actual issue. The core of the issue is that they're going to access and collect private health records.
Well, I think the core of the issue is people are just now thinking about the fact that government can do this, when in fact, if you ask health privacy advocates, they've been doing it for a very long time.
And so I was a medic back before, like everything started getting digitalized.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a medic in the Army, and we did a lot of, our notes for, medic stuff. And it was put into a medical file that everybody had, but you literally had to go to the aid station and pull somebody's medical records and flip through page by page to find things out of their medical records. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Nowadays, and that started changing about 2006, 2007, that everything started to go into a computer system. So now you can access people's medical records just super easy. Like, it's just a file dump, right?
Yep.
And a search bar. Like, you're looking for certain things, keywords, and it takes the what is it, that like the work that you would have to do. You don't have to just go to somebody's doctor's office, physically pull their record and flip through things anymore. It's just
it's like Googling something on your phone instead of going to the library and using the Dewey Decimal System to find the encyclopedia from the correct year to learn about the thing.
Right. So I always thought that it was problematic that they would go to a system that was so easy to manage. And I see some benefit in that, especially like somebody has a disease they need to, like cancer, I don't know, involve multiple doctors. You can just pass information along. But there's always a flip side of that, right? And the flip side to this is now they're collecting it, or they're going to, and I'm assuming this will pass because that's how these things go. Even if he's going to use this for collecting data and trying to find a cure and a cause for autism, it doesn't mean the next guy is going to utilize the same authority for good reasons. I don't actually think.
And can we touch on that cure for autism thing?
Yeah,
because that's a little amusing.
Right, and I don't think that. So Yeah, and well, like this is like I said, that paragraph was loaded.
Yeah.
So, claims there's a cure for autism. I'm pretty sure everybody in the Libertarian Party would disagree that there's a cure, and even if there was, why would you want to?
Yeah, autism is the cure.
Right? Don't. Um. Anyways, so uh, that and anyways, I'm not sure where I was going with that moment, but
Well, just
um,
if we're going to treat this as a disease, then it'd be kind of silly to think that there's one cause, because like most things going on in the brain, it's probably a basket of uh, nurture and a basket of nature. So there'll be some things that are genetic and some things that are conditional, environmental.
yeah, well, and everything that I know about like, well, and it so autism is just like one part of the the neurodivergent, I don't know, tree.
Yep.
That's how you would call it. But there is, I believe, just that there is that it's genetic in nature, that there are things that are environmental that can exacerbate it, basically, that can make it worse, but that you can't make something worse that never existed in the first place. And while I think that there are some, you know, perhaps brain injuries, maybe that's the right word. Like I'm thinking like babies that have had super high fevers and gotten sick, and then basically like it cooks their brain. Heat injuries, things that would cause. That's more of an injury. That's not a genetic or origin. You know what I mean? Um, and then, but I think that a lot of people once they well, and okay, so there's many parts to this actually, because this is like I said, is loaded. But what do you think? Autism, I feel like, has become a little bit more prominent in diagnosis. I've known a lot of people that have gotten diagnosed as with autism later on in life.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot more people who are probably just high functioning who have never gotten the diagnosis.
I'm familiar with such people.
um, and I think that that's a running joke in the Libertarian Party is that, like we're just a bunch of autists or we have the, the tism. And but people who have autism because they think and react and everything is different about, brain function,
Yeah.
see things differently. I
Yeah,
don't
and
see that as a
stereotypes are there
problem.
for a reason, and if you can say nothing else about libertarians, it's that they see the world very differently than the average person.
Oh yeah. And what was that term? Because I was watching something earlier, I think it was this morning, about like people who have ADHD, autism, these I don't want to call them a brain abnormality, but some a different level of functioning,
Mm-hmm.
tend to be more aggressive towards authority.
Yeah, oppositional defiant disorder. I
Yes,
looked it
thank
up.
you.
Yeah.
I was like, Joey, this is what it was meant to be. I can't like Google what are the like keywords
Mm-hmm.
and having problems with authority. And there's not a
Yeah,
single
yeah.
person.
You read off the definition of the non-medicalized definition of this, and you're describing libertarianism.
Yeah. And just a natural instinct to,
Recurrent pattern of defiant, disobedient, and hostile behavior towards authority figures.
I mean, they're not
Frequently
wrong.
argue with, refuse to comply with requests or rules, become easily annoyed, rejection of authority figure demands. It's just, these are just libertarians.
And I just had a thought. Um, so there's a couple of ways. If you're on the outside of this and you're looking in and be like, oh, well, this is actually a problem. But if you're on the inside, you're like, this isn't a problem. This is fine. I'm fine with this. I don't want to change anything about myself, But that people who would seek to control a population would also want normal
Yeah,
figures.
that's the problem, is that you look at a bunch of stuff that the administration is doing, And even if you think that the administration's doing this stuff from the right reasons or whatnot, if they were doing it for the wrong reasons, it would look exactly the same as this. That's the real concern, is that this is exactly the sort of stuff that I've been complaining about under prior administrations, is that this level of administrative overreach, this level of centralization, this level of acting without any sort of input from the populace is exactly the way that tyrants behave. And that's what I firmly believed under Bush Jr., under Obama, under Trump 1 to a lesser extent than I was expecting, actually.
But
Under
Trump 2 is definitely different than Trump
Trump
1.
2 is definitely different than Trump 1. There's a lot more of the Biden administration uh, disregard for any sort of interaction with media.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have seen several interactions where Trump administration appointees are just openly insulting, mocking, criticizing the corporate press in interviews. And like, yes, absolutely, you go after them, but also you still do need to be held accountable because you are in a position of power making decisions that affect hundreds of millions of people.
Truth and accountability is across the board. Nobody's immune from it. It doesn't matter what position you're in, what you do, where you come from, how much money you have. That doesn't matter whatsoever. And in fact, I would say, and maybe this is oppositional defiance disorder or whatever it is, but people who are at a higher power and have higher level of authority, they should be held not to a lesser accountability, but to a greater one. They should, if you're going to set the standards, you don't set the standards from the bottom, you set the standard from the top. And then I've had a term rolling through my head the last few days, especially with like the taxes. Trump announced he was going to perhaps roll back taxes on lower income families completely and then tax the rich higher. And I haven't looked into that too deeply to know much about it. But first thing that popped into my mind was that shit rolls downhill. That was something that, like in the Army, we talked about that a lot. Like, so if you're screwing it up, or like something goes wrong, and the people at the higher find out about it, the trouble rolls downhill. But taxes, these kinds of things could be seen a lot in the same way, that if you're taxing lower income people, you're just taxing it off the money that they're bringing home, their hourly job, their 9 to 5, or their swing shift taxes, like their income, right? They're not going to make up those taxes from somebody else below them, because we are at the bottom of the food chain, basically, right? But if you tax business owners and the people that are creating the economy at a higher rate, we are all going to pay higher taxes, because that might not come in actually like a check to the IRS, but it's going to come into wrapped up in the cost of the goods that we're buying. Because the guys at the top, if they're told they're going to have to spend more money to create a product, that cost of that product is going to get wrapped up into what they charge for it, and then we're ones that end up paying for it. So regardless, it doesn't matter who you tax more, the people at the bottom are always going to be the ones that pay. You look confused.
No, I'm just reading our chats. And
okay. We have chats.
Yeah. Yeah, I was one of those people who was saying, look, you actually believe that Trump read Project 2025, let alone is trying to follow it. And I've got to eat crow on that, because there's a laundry list of things, like a laundry list of bullet points from Project 2025 that Trump was pushing in his first 100 days, and I've got to eat crow on that. I thought that was I thought it was just a heritage project, like, wish list, and to be honest, it was. But then enough people who cared about that got into Trump's administration that it became a bunch of his talking points too.
I don't know, I didn't give Project 2025 in. I mean, I read what like was out there, and I don't can't remember anything off the top of my head about it at the time, but it seemed like that like the conservative leading people were ambivalent on. They're like, I don't know what this is, and the left was hysterical. And so any time that something makes the left hysterical, I'm like, I don't know, is this? I'm just gonna watch, see what happens. But this guy says it's going to be a reverse Robin Hood. The poor middle class will be paying more. The rich will be get the breaks. I believe that's kind of just what I said. So, if you tax the rich, there. Anyways, I'm not going to go through that again. But so how do you feel about the? So we went through like, well, and I kind of want to circle back to the autism thing. So really driving home, who was it? One of the founding fathers, was it Benjamin Franklin, Thomas? Whoever gives up security for liberty will have neither. Do you remember? Do you know him? Joey.
Yeah, sorry. I'm you're looking for a quote that I have seen attributed to Ben Franklin. I'm not sure if he actually said maybe Thomas Jefferson. I don't know. The give up liberty for security, you receive neither. Essentially, I'm butchering it, but you don't know who said it. No, it's not like it's not like we're on top of things here.
Ben Franklin. I was right.
Yeah, well.
So he who gives up freedom for security deserves neither. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to like think things out and there's open up which box of information is that in my head and then kind of push it out in last minute. But anyways, so that with the autism list and I don't know.
Yeah, and I do agree with Daniel that it's not an illness or an epidemic. It's not something that you can cure. I don't think that that's any reasonable way of looking at it.
No. So, anyways, well, I guess we should talk about the tariffs while we're on the Trump taxes.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of a big deal. And people have come out on both sides of that. Even libertarians, I've seen some libertarians be like, oh no, well, tariffs are, normal, but taxation is theft, is still theft, no matter what you call it. So tariff is a form of taxation.
Yep.
And we should,
Yeah, we're pitching designs for our 2025 State Fair shirt. And one thing that's going to be in the running is a reboot of our taxation is theft shirt that says "and tariffs are too" in a different font. Because apparently that needs to be said. At the same time, I've been one of these, I'm not really 100% libertarian on protectionism. Like I think strategic interest is a real thing for societies, not necessarily governments. And I think that it is not absolutely fantastic that everything that we need to survive has been made more and more in places that aren't here by people who aren't us and don't have our values and might decide that we're not worth trading with in the future. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to impose a 287% tariff on them or some nonsense and force them to stop trading with us sooner. That's not the way to solve that problem.
And I don't think that most people know this, but a significant amount of our agriculture, which means the food you put on your table literally 3 times a day, is, goes across the ocean. Sometimes even it's grown or raised here, shipped to China to package and produce, and then shipped back. And that's one of the agreements that we have with the Chinese.
And that's one of those things that that I firmly believe we should stop doing. But the way to get us to stop doing it doesn't, I don't think, involve prohibitive tariffs.
Okay, here it is.
I could believe the 10% thing. I couldn't believe the 135% thing.
So in the last 7 years,
I disagree, Daniel. I don't think that American isolationism led to the Great Depression. I think that there were a variety of causes to the Great Depression, but I actually blame government intervention in the economy far more than I blame government non-intervention in other people's economies.
well, okay, so tangents. This is one of the things that learning and reading about the gold standard. A lot of people talk about, what was it, 1971 is when the Nixon administration took us officially off the gold standard, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was 1913, around then, where they started literally collecting up Americans' gold and centralizing it with the government. It was like at the risk of you being fined if you didn't turn your gold in.
April 20th, 1933, FDR formally took the United States off the gold standard through executive order and a joint resolution of
33.
Congress.
There's something else that happened.
Essentially voiding every contract that had ever been written up until that point, because they had all said that they could be paid in US dollars or equivalent bullion, but then FDR banned the private ownership of bullion.
But the Great Depression started in 29 officially.
Yeah, but I'm
Well, that didn't
convinced
help.
that it would have ended a hell of a lot sooner if the federal government hadn't decided to bankrupt the currency and start massive jobs programs.
Yeah. Speaking of which, depression and that kind of stuff. I have, and this is like strictly, I don't know. I'm not an authority. I don't know what I'm talking about necessarily. Like I kind of do. I'm kind of going to give you an overview of some of the things that conversations. I have a lot of conversations with people that talk about a variety of things, especially when it comes to government, the Fed, those kinds of, because just the nature of what we do, right? And I had a friend a couple of years ago that, he's really big into like anti taxes. He actually went to prison in the 80s for being one of those anti-taxes kinds of people. And then but he was talking to me about in Russia when it was the USSR, that there was, what was the money in Russia? Was it the ruble?
Probably.
Something like that. Anyways, the way that they eventually got communism like out of Russia wasn't well, how do I explain this? Wasn't like you couldn't fight communism with armies, right?
It was the erosion of the cultural support for the Soviet state.
Well, and actually it was an economic war. So economically, yes, rubles. Thank you. It's my brain glitches on a regular basis, but
and also it could have been something else. They could have renamed the currency after the fall. They didn't, but they could have.
No, but I'm talking about before the fall. So
exactly. So like now it's rubles, but maybe decades ago it had been called something else. It happened to have not.
No, this is I think what it was back then.
No, but it's still called rubles. I know what it's called now. I don't necessarily know off the top of my head what it was called in the 80s.
So one of the contributing factors with, and this isn't like you can't, in an economic war, basically, and you have countries that are vying for trade positions and, like money and power and all these kinds of things. So you have essentially, and they're all engaged in it, right? This economic war, I guess is what we'll call it. I'm not really sure war is the right word, but so when the fall of the USSR happened, it wasn't because, some anti-communist army came rolling in and, the Cold War, there was actually nukes dropped. That never happened. The way they brought the USSR down is through economics. What they were doing is that they were basically taking Russian money and stockpiling it. Other countries were. And, big people in these other countries stockpiling this money, Russian money, and then all at the same time started dumping the money back into the economy, and it tanked the value of their money. And so when that happens and your economy collapses, then there's always this kind of this restructuring that has to happen as a result to be able to keep your government and your people and everybody. People are going to revolt if they're starving, right? And if they can't afford to buy food, then that's a problem. So that was the basis of how the USSR eventually did fall. The concern is for me when I think about this kind of stuff with the economics, the United States, right? So you're talking about like strategies and on the world stage, nothing new. There's not new strategies. They're just recycling old ones, right?
History rhymes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That we have been sending literally trillions of dollars that nobody has any accounting for whatsoever. And I just read a report, and I wish I could find it, but it was one of those, I'm not sure. Anyways, I just read this in the last few days, is that there is unnamed sources that like there's money just being dumped back into the economy right now. And that when I read that, I was like, oh, this is exactly what happened to Russia.
Well, I mean, there are two thoughts that I have about this. One of them is just from a private investor standpoint,
Mhm.
is that I've spoken with financial advisors recently, and they're all on the same page that everybody's waiting. And this recently, by recently I mean like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, they were all waiting. That all of the people who were holding back money for big clients were holding back money for big clients. They were waiting for something in the economy to change and stock prices to drop. And then they were going to start a process of buying in a little bit more every single week until the dip turns around, and then assess whether they want to continue buying as the stock prices go back up or not. So in a way, that's where a lot of this money is coming from. It's coming from private investors who are holding assets in savings accounts or brokerage liquid deposits or money market accounts. They were holding it in cash or cash equivalents, waiting for the right time to put a bunch of money into the stock market or put a bunch of money into the bond market. And the time is now, so that's part of it. But then why are the prices still going down? Why are share prices still going down? It's because the market doesn't know what to do with these tariffs. They're too new and they're constantly changing. And even if the change isn't constant, there's this perception that you can't tell what the tariffs are going to be a week from now because Xi Jinping could post something on Twitter that Trump gets mad at and decides to increase the tariffs by another 20%. There's nobody can tell you that won't happen with any degree of certainty. But the other thought that I have is that the scenario that you propose for the cause of the fall of the Soviet Union makes me think that it is now triply precarious, the position the United States has put itself in by insisting on being the world's reserve currency, but abandoning the Bretton Woods Agreement and switching from a gold-backed dollar to a petrodollar. That now we're in a position where the BRICS nations are signing contracts with each other to trade natural resources that don't involve US dollars. They trade in their own currencies. So now the idea that the US has the reserve currency of the world is provably false. And we still have dozens of trillions of dollars worth of US Treasury bonds that are being held by foreign countries or by investors in foreign countries who have much stricter governments than ours about what private individuals are allowed to invest in and when they have to divest of those things. So it is not beyond reason that there could be some sort of decision reached or some sort of series of individuals making their own decisions a la standalone complex that just decide that they don't want US dollars anymore. They have these US dollar treasury bonds, and the interest rate return is too low and the currency is too stable, and they just don't want it anymore. And that sends our currency into free fall, and it loses the remaining however many percent of the value that it used to have back in the 30s.
Right. Well, and so how does that all tie in? We have comments. Sorry. Um, let me put this up here. So Russia, and maybe for people that are just kind of watching but don't really know any of these terms, BRICS, was it? BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China.
And South Africa or somebody, the actual players change over time.
Yeah.
Like, is Saudi Arabia in that club now that the Biden administration has pissed them off and the Trump administration has done nothing to endear itself with them?
Well, and Saudi Arabia has a lot.
Yeah.
They have
Yeah, if you include Saudi Arabia and China's mostly fabricated claims on the natural resource deposits in the South China Sea and Russia, then that is a substantial amount of fossil fuel resources that they can dig up.
yeah,
And
but
I
then
think that
also
something that might be like weighing on the opposite side of the scales for this is
mm,
the fact that Trump literally said "drill, baby, drill" in his inaugural address. I think that boosted a lot of confidence in the uh, oil and natural gas companies in the United States and in European countries that, oh, the US is really in on this now. But it might have pissed off Saudi Arabia even more because now we're no longer a valued customer, we're now a competitor.
did Trump open the pipelines back up?
I don't remember. I think that Keystone XL is still dead, but I don't know much of the details beyond that.
So it's Keystone Oil to be built. No, it's not.
Hmm.
Well, I mean, gas prices haven't changed. And arguably, they've fluctuated between bad and worse. I don't know.
Well, I mean, not that bad. Well, compared to what is the thing? Because the gas prices around here have been relatively stable around the $3 mark, like down to 285 in the dead of winter with a bunch of fuel subsidies. Thank you, state of Minnesota, for taking my tax dollars away to subsidize my fuel purchases. Um, but then in summer months, what, 315, 320? It's not like it's 387 or 425 a gallon, which I definitely saw under Biden. So
Well, I
it
guess
could
if
be
you take
worse.
into consideration inflation, that maybe $3 for gas is the new normal.
Yeah. I mean, that is definitely a way of looking at it. I remember complaining to uh, upon deaf ears back in 2021 and early 2022 that with a third of the US dollars in existence having been printed in the last 18 months, it is completely reasonable to believe that the US dollar will lose 25 to 35% of its purchasing power over the next decade. And I was essentially told, oh, yeah, well, I'll believe it when I see it. It hasn't even been a decade yet, and we've already seen it.
Well, so when the first during the initial lockdown phase, I don't want to say in case the algorithm pings our podcast, but that time period of which shall not be named, and the uh what were the checks called? And I can't remember. Was it like,
Stimulus
yeah, the
checks.
stimulus checks, and they were
Uh-huh.
starting to come out, and they were kind of loose about those, right? Like who they were sending them to. Some families got them twice. I mean, there wasn't a lot of oversight um, for those checks. And then you saw like these huge funding bills that happened March, April of 2020, and then periodically every few months you would have another huge spending bill, and then I mean, what other results when you're dumping all that extra money into the economy and into circulation? The only result of that could possibly be is hyperinflation. Maybe not hyperinflation like Germany 1920s, but still, cost of things today is significantly higher than it was in 2020 or 2019. But that's what happens when you do. What was the first spending bill? Like 18? No, maybe not. $2 trillion. I think that's around $2 trillion dumped into the economy that literally could have given like every American more than this they got actually on a stimulus check, because that's not where the majority of that money was going. It wasn't to Americans, it was going to other places, and just the COVID lockdowns were justifying the spending.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to actually do that math really quick.
And to detour back to oil for a moment, Daniel, you're absolutely correct. The reasons that Iran is a threat now, or is perceived to be a threat now to the military-industrial complex, is because Iran was supposed to be a threat to us economically, but we decided that the way to solve that problem was to, with the help and prodding of Saudi Arabia, just do a color revolution there and try to install a new government. And lo and behold, it backfired spectacularly. And now they chant death to America in the streets. Fantastic. Really good work, CIA.
So $2 trillion spending bill, given evenly to every American in the United States, should have been $6,500 per person.
Mm-hmm. If the money had been going to people instead of corporations.
Mm. So, yeah. Anyways, speaking of kind of getting back to the original topic, autism and libertarians, if you are part of the Libertarian Party and this year have oppositional defiance disorder, and they end up pulling everybody's records, actually maybe not, maybe not having a diagnosis is a good thing at this point. But if you're not on the list right now, at this point, you're actually just not trying hard enough. So
yeah, I do think it would be rather difficult to not be on lists at this point.
Yeah, especially with how much access they have to all the information. Everything is recorded all the time. And increasingly, I think my concern is the use of AI in law enforcement, the financial sector, well, and everything. It's being used in everything.
Yeah, I happen to have some level of experience in the accounting industry, and my professors want everybody to understand how important AI is going to be in the future, but they also don't shy away from the fact that it's in a terrible state right now to actually be effective, and that hallucinations are very, very real things, and we need to be very careful about them, and that AI is a tool, AI is not a decision maker. And I think that would be a lovely thing for us to remember, but I don't think it's something we will. I don't think it's something we do. And I think that most police departments are perfectly happy with an 87% accuracy rate, and they will pull people over based off of the camera telling them that they should be pulled over.
Yeah, becoming increasingly reliant on, information telling you what to think and how to think. It's a basis of laziness. But from what I know of people is that most people I know are going to take the easy path towards whatever it is that's the goal. And even if there's somebody that's, tends to be like a hard worker, maybe there are times where they're still going to take the easy path. Most people don't have the capability of being able to differentiate or be able to see, in the future how their decisions are going to affect things, play them out long term. I don't see how AI and especially law enforcement could ever be anything but end us in like a dystopian surveillance state.
Yeah. So how about them flock cameras being rolled out in several places in Minnesota?
Oh, it's not several, it's everywhere. They may be talking about them in several places, but they're already in Bemidji.
Oh, I mean, Bemidji is one of the dozen places I know of that are pushing them, but I know of another dozen places that have either rejected the idea or are refusing to have the conversation, so they can't have been on the record as being for it or against it, and they're just waiting to see what direction the wind is going to blow with court cases that are still pending.
So when the flock cameras, do those go through state law enforcement?
They're a private company that contracts out with agencies, and anybody who has a contract with them, be it private or public, can see every second of feed from every camera in the country. It is not geographically bounded.
What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, I know. I can't think of a single thing. You know, only good can come of this. Of course. Definitely no bad. Definitely no already documented cases of police officers using this to stalk their exes or anything like that. Couldn't possibly happen.
I just watched a thing that popped up. I don't, maybe it was somebody on my in social media that, you know, shared it, and that's how I saw it. I don't remember. But it was basically a guy showed up and did a police department. So there's two, actually. Now I'm thinking about it. There's two. One of them, they showed up to a guy's apartment, knocked on his door late at night. So he answers the door with the gun in his hands. And with half split second, they shoot him dead. He's in his own home, knock in the middle of the night or late at night or whatever it is. He opens the door with a gun in his hands. And they don't even like positive. There's got to be one. I hope that cop's career is dead, just as dead as the guy he shot. And he should also spend time in prison, but you know he's not going to, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then the other one I saw was that they were doing a they'd surrounded a house. They were at the wrong house. Well, it was the right address, but they got the address right, but they didn't positively ID the guy on the inside that they were trying to get. The address was right. The people on the inside who lived in the home was wrong. So they got the right address, but the people that they were looking for didn't even live at that
Right,
house.
like it was a bad address or an old address or something, or just because the guy wasn't there that day or something.
They threw I think it was a flashbang into the bedroom window where there was a baby sleeping, and killed the baby. So, I mean, until the police departments and law enforcement clean up the things that they're doing wrong, why would we give them more power and authority? They have enough.
I mean, the state of Ohio just lost a court case that they were trying to keep a measure off of their ballots that would be a referendum on qualified immunity.
Mm-hmm.
So because they lost the case, their Secretary of State has to put it on the ballot. So now Ohio's going to be able to vote at the next general election, assuming that all of the remaining administrative hurdles are cleared by the movement.
Yeah, but there's going to be a lot of money dumped into that to keep their qualified immunity.
There's going to be so much money dumped into protecting qualified immunity instead of protecting citizens.
Right. I'm definitely not an ACAB person when it comes to law enforcement and rules. And, you know, like there's got to be peace. I want peace and I want people to do the right thing. But realistically, we know we live in a fallen society. Like, not everybody's peaceful. Not everybody has good intentions. There needs to be some sort of method for getting justice when somebody does something to you that's terrible. You know what I mean? But at the same time, giving too much power to a group of people with no oversight, no accountability whatsoever, except for in themselves. Like they're in control of accountability for themselves, right? And then giving them immunity from decisions they make that permanently affect other people's lives is just such a combination of, you know,
apathy
a recipe
and arrogance.
For disaster. What?
Apathy and arrogance on the part of the lawyers and judges who decided that this was going to be a nationwide policy, because it's not written into law anywhere.
So I don't even know how we got from MAHA to autism to this, but this is what happens when, I guess, sign of autism, maybe, I don't know. But Daniel said, check out the footage of the cops in Idaho rolling up in the house where an autistic guy was in the yard with a knife. I did watch that, and the people, there are some people that I know that are cops that I think that are doing it for a good reason. Like maybe that's where it originated, but there are a lot of dumb grunts out there that are just all they're really capable of doing is following orders. And those are the type of people that tend to gravitate towards these positions. So anyways, any last minute thoughts for the show?
I do want to double back to something that Daniel put in the comments earlier.
Okay.
If only someone had written a book warning about cameras everywhere. Oh wait, they did. His name was George Orwell. Well, funny thing about that, Orwell got something wrong in his predictions. He thought the government would have to install all of these cameras. He didn't realize that people would voluntarily put them in our own pockets.
And ask them, like, well, we have Alexa devices, and I just said the name, so it.
Oh, it was already listening.
Oh yeah, it was already.
Mm-hmm.
So every once in a while I throw it off. I'm like, I love Biden. I'm a Democrat. They're doing great. Just just throw off my FBI agents. No, they're probably watching right now, so I want to give a shout out to my FBI. Sorry, I'm keeping you so busy, but
yeah, the record. I have a name for my imagined 3-letter agency monitor. His name is The Record. Just for the record.
So, all right. Well, any last minute thoughts, questions, comments? If anybody's interested in actually joining the Libertarian Party, Joy and I are both on the executive committee. Mm-hmm. We both stay very busy trying to do things to, forward liberty in the state of Minnesota, which is a never-ending task at the point.
Yeah. So if you see anything that's not getting done, it's because we're not doing it. That's the reason. It's because the two of us. No, that's not fair. There are other very valued volunteers in the party who do a bunch of stuff.
Well, I wasn't even going in that direction. I was talking about like state affairs, things that are happening within the United States, within Minnesota, that really at this point, and maybe people don't see it obviously, but there isn't a whole lot that we don't have some sort of involvement in right now. And that's, state politics, local politics, maybe not all local politics, because Minnesota's a big state, right? But we do run people and help people that are going to run for local politics. And we had 100% success rate last election cycle for our local politics. And we had some people that didn't want to, local politics is nonpartisan in Minnesota. Anyway, so
in name at least. And there are some people who want to make that segregation a little bit firmer, and they don't
but like those people that are like, are part of our party involved doing stuff. They still won. Like we're on the right track. And I think that if there was ever a time where people were just kind of craving a little more leniency and freedom in their lives, like how much further do we have to get towards authoritarianism? I think the closer we get towards being complete lockdown, that more that people will kind of lash out. It's that oppositional defiance disorder.
And the less it becomes less of a disorder to be oppositional and defiant, the more authoritarian the authority you're rebelling against is.
Yeah. So
because the disorder is when it negatively impacts your life, but at a certain point, it negatively impacts your life more to go along with it than it does to oppose it.
I'm trying to think that, okay, so there have been times where just being like kind of the person who's like, but should, questions everything has definitely negatively impacted my life. But overall, I'm not sorry. So
yeah, I'm in the same boat. My dad taught me to be skeptical of all authority, and then was confused and frustrated when I was skeptical of everything he told me.
See, my parents tried to teach me the opposite, and it was just not.
It did not take, obviously.
And so then I joined the Army, and I spent 7 years in the Army, still being oppositional. And if between my very conservative fundamental parents and the Army could not break me, there is absolutely no hope for me at this point. So
yeah, I remember a couple of stories you've told that you might have had a slightly higher rank if you hadn't been quite so oppositional and you just gone along to get along.
Yeah, I was very bad at playing the game. Anyways, if you're interested in looking for information in the party, want to run local for, I don't know, school board, township, city council, anything like that, reach out. Like we can,
LPMN.org. Check us out. Go look at our
yeah,
website. It's new and shiny.
learn more about the philosophy behind the Libertarian Party, because we're not just a party with like a set of agenda. We're actually based off of a philosophy that really highlights peace and prosperity for people, you know. So that's what we want, peace and prosperity. Who could possibly be against that, except for probably every person that's following us on Twitch right now. But yeah, lpmn.org.
We love you, Twitch chatters.
Yeah, keeps things spicy. Never changes our minds, but keeps things spicy. What's the email address for finding out information?
info@lpmn.org.
Yeah, and there's also,
and that is not an unmonitored inbox. I check that inbox multiple times a week, almost every day, actually.
There's an events page on the website. We've got a few things going on right now, so there's a lot of opportunity to get involved and, you know, be a force in the state of Minnesota, where we need a force to keep both major parties accountable, both equally. All right. Any last comments? I know I've said that like 3 times, but
nope. I think that's it. We did that. I think I'm going to count that as the outro because you told people to go become members. So that's good enough.
Or donate. We like that too.